Aria Thompson gripped her first-class boarding pass, her heart racing as she approached her seat on the transcontinental flight from New York to Los Angeles. At 35, she was a successful corporate lawyer, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, her confidence radiating through her professional demeanor. As she settled into her leather seat, she noticed the flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, watching her intently. Aria had experienced subtle racism throughout her career, but she always maintained her composure and professionalism. "Excuse me," the flight attendant said, her tone sharp. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Aria handed it over, her movements deliberate and calm. The woman examined the pass, then looked back at Aria with barely concealed skepticism. "I'll need to verify this ticket," the attendant announced, walking away without further explanation. Minutes later, the lead flight attendant approached Aria. "Ma'am, we're having some concerns about your ticket's validity. Would you mind coming with me?" The other first-class passengers watched, some with uncomfortable silence, others with subtle glances. Aria felt the weight of their stares, understanding immediately the underlying current of racial profiling. "I can assure you my ticket is completely legitimate," Aria responded, her voice steady. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago and have all necessary documentation." What followed was a humiliating process of public scrutiny. The flight crew demanded she leave the first-class section, suggesting she might have mistakenly been seated in the wrong area. Despite her protestations and offer to show additional identification, they insisted. Just as Aria was about to be escorted from the section, an unexpected ally emerged. Mark Reynolds, a prominent white businessman seated nearby, stood up. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he declared loudly. "I've been on this flight route multiple times and I've seen numerous ticketing issues resolved without such public spectacle. This treatment is discriminatory and unprofessional." His intervention created a momentary pause. Other passengers began murmuring in agreement, their collective awareness shifting the dynamic of the confrontation. The airline's systematic attempt to marginalize Aria had backfired. Instead of isolating her, they had inadvertently created a moment of solidarity and public accountability. 7 minutes after the initial confrontation, the airline's regional manager was contacted. After a brief, tense conversation and verification of Aria's credentials, not only was she reinstated in her first-class seat, but the flight attendants who had initiated the incident were quietly removed from the flight. Mark Reynolds, who turned out to be a civil rights attorney, discreetly slipped Aria his business card. "If you're interested in pursuing this further, I'd be happy to help," he said quietly. Aria's experience that day was more than just a personal victory. It became a catalyst for broader discussions about racial profiling in the airline industry, sparking conversations about systemic discrimination and the importance of standing up against injustice. As the plane soared above the clouds, Aria reflected on the unexpected journey, not just of travel, but of resilience, dignity, and the power of collective moral courage. As the flight continued, the initial confrontation was far from over. While Aria had been reinstated in her seat, the underlying tensions simmered just beneath the surface. Mark Reynolds, the civil rights attorney who had intervened, began discreetly documenting the incident on his laptop. He recognized this was more than just an isolated event. It was a systemic issue that demanded comprehensive exposure. Midway through the flight, an unexpected twist emerged. A passenger named Elena Rodriguez, a respected investigative journalist, overheard the conversation and approached Aria. "I work with a national news network," she whispered. "Would you be interested in sharing your story?" The airline's regional manager, who had been hastily contacted during the initial confrontation, was now in full damage control mode. Unbeknownst to the passengers, a heated conference call was happening at the airline's headquarters, with legal and public relations teams frantically strategizing. Aria learned that this wasn't an isolated incident. Mark Reynolds revealed he had been collecting similar testimonies from multiple professionals of color who had experienced comparable discriminatory treatment. This potential class action lawsuit could expose deep-rooted institutional racism within the airline industry. The flight attendants who had been removed were now being questioned separately. Their nervous interactions suggested this wasn't the first time they had been involved in questionable incidents. As the plane descended towards Los Angeles, a media storm was brewing. Elena had already contacted her network, preparing to break the story. Mark was collecting detailed statements, and Aria found herself at the center of what could become a landmark civil rights investigation. The seemingly routine transcontinental flight had transformed into a pivotal moment of social reckoning, with potential far-reaching consequences for the airline and the broader transportation industry. As the aircraft touched down in Los Angeles, the atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation. Aria Thompson found herself at the epicenter of what was quickly becoming a national conversation about racial discrimination in air travel. The moment passengers began deplaning, media vans were already converging outside the airport. Elena Rodriguez had worked her contacts, and the story was about to break on multiple news networks. Mark Reynolds had prepared preliminary documentation, revealing a pattern of systemic discrimination that extended far beyond this single incident. Airport security attempted to isolate Aria, requesting she remain for additional questioning. But Mark's legal expertise became immediately apparent. "My client will be happy to cooperate," he stated firmly, "through proper legal channels with appropriate representation present." The airline's representatives looked increasingly nervous. Internal communications revealed that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader cultural problem within their organization. Anonymous employee testimonies were already being compiled, suggesting a deeply ingrained system of racial profiling. Aria's professional background as a corporate lawyer gave her a unique advantage. She understood precisely how to navigate this complex situation, maintaining her composure while gathering critical evidence. Her smartphone had recorded key moments of the confrontation, providing irrefutable documentation of the discriminatory treatment. As cameras began to gather and reporters positioned themselves, Aria realized this moment was bigger than her personal experience. It represented a potential turning point in addressing institutional racism within the transportation industry. The regional manager of the airline attempted to approach Aria with a hastily prepared statement and settlement offer, but Mark Reynolds intercepted, making it clear that this was not about a quick resolution, but systemic change. By the time they exited the airport, the story had already begun trending on social media. Hashtags supporting Aria were spreading rapidly, with professionals across various industries sharing their own experiences of workplace discrimination. As the narrative reached its dramatic culmination, one question remained paramount. What do you believe should happen next? How can industries truly address systemic racism, and what responsibilities do organizations have in preventing discriminatory practices? Share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below. If you enjoyed this compelling narrative about justice and societal change, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content that explores critical social issues, personal stories of resilience, and impactful narratives that challenge systemic inequities. Goodbye.